You can see it glowing. It's like 6:30 and it's glowing. It's pretty nice. Hey everybody, it's birdie time. Welcome back to the channel. I've been testing it out and today I'll be giving my review of the Total Eclipse Hex. I was able to get my hands on a couple of hexes for this review for a bit of comparison, but most of the footage is taken with this Total Eclipse Hex plastic. Thank you, Matt, for letting me borrow 3 of your hexes. I really appreciated that. It helped me out. Also, side note, congrats to the 3 winners of the discs from my 3K subs giveaway. Those discs will be arriving this weekend or early next week at the latest. I hope you like them. I hope they fly well for you and that they're a great addition to your collection. Also, shame on the scammer who attempted to try to convince me that he was one of the winners, despite being a spam account. Thank goodness I might be a disc golfer, but I'm not a complete idiot. So I was able to spot him pretty easily and tell him off and report him. But just so you guys know, I will be doing everything that I can to make sure that there's no issue with giving a giveaway disc to you and actually matching it to the real viewer. Because YouTube does not allow for me to send a direct message to any subscribers, what I'll do is I'll leave you a comment. I'll reply to your comment announcing that you've won, and be sure to notice and look for my username, bhirdietime, having that gray background, which means that I'm actually commenting as the creator of the video, not just an account named bhirdietime, but the creator's account. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure that you notice that it's really me and not just someone impersonating me. And then at that point, I'll be asking you to get a hold of me through another social media, especially Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I have bhirdietime accounts already set up on those. If I end up having any doubts about you legitimately being my viewer, I might ask you to go back to that YouTube comment and reply to it and say, hey, yes, it's me, my username is such and such, and I just message you on Instagram. Something like that, just to make sure that you really are you, because I would hate to give a disc away to somebody who just doesn't deserve it. As always, it probably helps for you to have an idea of me as a disc golfer so that you would know how the disc might fly when you're throwing it. So I'm rated 956. Thank you, ratings update. A little bump for that. I max out at about 410 feet. I tend to throw with fan grip and a gentle hyzer on my normal release. Once again, quick shout out to Fox Flyers. You can get your Total Eclipse Hex or any other disc golf needs that you have can be met at foxflyersdiscgolf.com. If you use my code BIRDIE, you can get free shipping on orders over $25. If you do end up using my discount code, this is a great way for you to show a little bit of support for me because it shows the Fox family that I'm worth keeping around. Also, as a side note, my hex weighs 177 grams. Enough chatter, let's take a look at how the hex flies. After just a couple of throws, I really felt like I completely understood how the hex was supposed to fly. Now, I didn't actually, but I felt like I did. Obviously, it takes some time to really get to know your disc, but after just a few throws, I started getting birdie putts and even started parking a few holes, at least from the short pads. I found that it was pretty comfortable for me to throw the hex around 240 to 280 feet. I did throw it just over 300 a couple of times, but to be honest, for me, when I'm topping out over 300, I'm switching discs to something else that's going to hit that distance easier and more consistently. But the hex is capable of going there, and I'm sure that a higher arm speed than mine could rip it out past 350 if they really wanted to. I found that straight shots were pretty easy to hit, especially around the 250 mark. I tended to aim a little bit off to the right of my target, just to allow that fade to kick in near the end, and as the disc kind of slowed down and fell into the circle, it would keep pushing a little bit left toward the basket. I found with a slower throw, it definitely was pushing on that fade the entire flight, but with a higher arm speed, it was pushing out pretty straight, maybe a little drift to the right before coming back at the end. Even with a higher speed throw, the hex really tended to stay close to the line that I was throwing it on, barely drifting off target before coming back. The hex handles well for hyzer shots and provides a lot of predictability. Of course, this isn't the way to get max distance, but for a stable disc like the hex, there's really no point in trying to get it to be your new best distance throw. The hex held the line well on hyzer with hardly any flip up, and when it hit the ground, it tended to stick the ground and stay pretty close to where it landed first. I had a lot of success throwing with a little bit of anhyzer, to shape shots down fairways that weren't perfectly straight. Forcing the hex to drift right through its flight path and then slowly fight its way back to flat or a little bit of finish at the end seems to be a pretty good shot shape for a lot of our local courses. Getting in some throws at Jonesville, I pretty quickly started to birdie a lot of holes from Jonesville shorts, earning a lot of birdie putts in the circle, usually with that straight shot or that bit of Anheuser to drift it and then fade it a little bit at the end. I only had a little bit of wind to test the hex in, but it seemed to handle it for the most part pretty well. Into a headwind, it did drift more than it would to the right, but it wasn't as if it suddenly became a flippy disc. It was fine. As a mid-range, the hex has a slower speed and a smaller rim width, and as such has minimal ground play. It still has some speed, it still has a little stability. Anything that's fading can get a little bit of ground play and scoot over to the side, but for the most part, where the hex hits the ground is pretty close to where it stops. I had a great time testing out the hex, and I think that there are a lot of fairways that you can hit off the tee and really get a good flight. But for me, the ideal and best shot shape for the hex is pretty much a dead straight shot for around 250 to 280 feet with a little bit of fade at the end toward the basket, toward the circle. I think that's ideal, but of course you can make it work for all sorts of different shots. For me personally, I think the hex is best as an upshot disc, staying close to the pin for an easy putt. Even with discs that I know well, I make plenty of mistakes. And of course, testing out a new disc is never going to go perfectly well. As always, it seems like trees are the mortal enemies of disc golfers, and I am no exception. A few times I let go of the hex a little early and a little bit high, which of course did not work out in my favor. I have to say though, the worst shot in terms of result was definitely chucking it into the creek. That always sucks. The hex actually worked pretty decently as a putter for me. It is pretty flexible, pretty bendy, so that's not quite the level of rigidity that my Wardens have, but I was able to putt with it pretty well in the circle and hit a few circle 2 putts as well. My longest putt being a 60-footer. Alright, now that you've seen it fly, let's take a look up close. This is me checking in from the future. I forgot to talk about the different types of plastic. Now I didn't actually get much experience with the differences. I did throw the Signature Eclipse, another Eclipse, and then the Watermelon Proton Hex. I would say that they were all hexes. They flew very similarly, and unless it was more beaten in than the other ones, one of the Eclipse seemed to fly a little less stable, a tiny bit more flip to it than the others. But again, that could just have been that specific disc, not necessarily the plastic. But that was the experience that I got with them. They're very similar. Like I said, they're all hexes. Not a whole lot of difference between them from what I could see. Also a fun little glimpse you can get of my editing process. It's going well. I think the Total Eclipse plastic feels pretty good in the hand. I like the gentle give, the little bit of flexibility, and it just kind of seems ready to get ripped out of my hand. I do think that it gets a little bit slick when it's raining, but then again, most discs do. And the glow is a pretty huge bonus. Not only does it help you find it at night, but it lets you throw it straight into the bag immediately as soon as you hear the words Glow Golf. At 21.4 centimeters in diameter, the hex is wider than 76% of other discs, with the biggest jump coming in for the Superdillo and the Tomoko, which are, you can see in the graph, it jumps from around 22.1 centimeters up into the 23s. Quite a difference. When you contrast with the other mid-ranges though, 73% of mids are wider than the hex. So the hex comes in a little below average for diameter for mids, but a little wider in diameter compared to discs as a whole. The hex is 1.6 centimeters tall. Compared to all other discs, the hex is on the short side, only taller than 13% of other discs. When you look at mid-ranges specifically, only one disc is actually shorter than that 1.6 centimeters, the Lone Star Lone Wolf. Everything else is as tall as or taller than the hex. We have 1.3 centimeters for the rim depth, and the hex comes in deeper than about 60% of other discs, but compared to other mid-ranges, it's dead in the middle, with 78 of the 81 mid-ranges sharing that 1.3 centimeters of depth. And then of course, you have the Tomoko way off on its own at 2.3 centimeters. The rim width of the Hex is 1.4 centimeters. The Hex is in the bottom 42% of all discs, a little below average for the rim width, but compared to other mid-ranges, only 20% are wider than the Hex. By using these 4 metrics, I looked for any discs that shared an identical shape to the Hex, and I actually found none. I had to actually provide a little more leeway with the disc diameter, about 0.2 of a centimeter, to get a few discs that are very similar to the Hex and should have essentially the same grip. At least the rim width, rim depth, and height of the disc will be the same, but the diameter will be just a little bit off. So adjusting for that diameter, we have the Wild Discs Addicts V2, the Mint Discs Mustang, and the MVP Detour that are very, very similar. So if you've thrown any of those, there's a good chance that the Hex feels pretty much the same. As far as the flight numbers go, the 5.5, -1, 1, I think it's extremely close. If I had to change something, I suppose I could see the -1 maybe being a -0.5. I think there is that touch of understability, definitely, but it's very slight. So I could see the -1.1, maybe -0.51 or -1.2, something in there just to add that little extra sliver of stability there. I just wasn't tending to get a whole lot of drift to it, just a touch. A little flip up here, a gentle drift right there. So I think it's close. It's pretty darn close. I really enjoyed throwing the Hex. I think it's great for a lot of arm speeds. Pretty much anybody can benefit from a stable mid-range. If you're really ripping on it, maybe you drift it a little to the right. If you're throwing a little slower, like me, or even slower, a straight shot or just a consistent fade can really be a good addition to the bag. I think it's a fantastic disc and deadly within 300 feet for most of us. I'm very close to squeezing the Hex into the bag, but I'm not quite convinced of it. I like it, but I have some throwing putters and my echoes are already in the bag and I'm reluctant to make a change. Of course, if I play somewhere where there's a lot of low ceilings, then I might take the Pixel out and the Hex goes straight in the bag. And of course, if I'm playing glow golf, this thing is going to be the first disc that I reach for. As much as I loved using the Hex, I have to say that the Echo is still my favorite mid. I use it for straight shots from about 240 to 300 feet, and it's just really consistent for me. But let me know, what's your favorite mid-range? Is it the Hex? Is it the Echo? Is it something else? Let me know in the comments and tell me what type of shots you use it for. Thanks again for watching. As always, thanks for watching. Catch you guys on the next one. For my backhand right hand, I like to go on the right side. Now I usually am able to, when I'm able to hit the gap, I go too far. So I think this Hex will actually control the speed for me and slow down sooner rather than cruising past the basket. Of course I hit a tree, but I think I hit a tree like 30 short. So I think I was gonna be basically near bullseye. Well, I think I hit this tree only 12 feet short of the pin and ended up down here. Oops. So I would have gone past, but I wouldn't have been cruising by on the right side like I normally do. I would have been hyzering across the circle and still having putt.